Have you ever wondered if Jesus got into a fight? Of course you have, and that's why I am making this video. Jesus was a brawler. He could really beat up anyone. Okay, I wouldn't say a brawler, but he did get into a lot of fights. A lot of verbal fights. Okay, more like heated debates. Now, a lot of the times, Jesus is seen confronting the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees were the bad guys that just kept coming back. Like these guys.
We're blasting off again!
You know who else got into a lot of fights? This guy. Now, Goku has fought many weirdos in his time, but today we're going to be focusing on Frieza. Now, the story goes that Frieza and Goku were playing a Connect 4 game. Now, Frieza had never lost a game before, and it looked like he was going to lose this one. Now, in the heat of the moment, Frieza calls Goku a monkey. And Goku gets upset because he's actually self-conscious of the fact that he lost his tail as a kid. So in return, he calls Frieza a clown. This entire interaction blows up and it turns out into an all-out war. Now, Jesus and the Pharisees also get into a fight. Okay, more like a heated debate because the Pharisees don't like what Jesus is teaching. Now, let's go to Matthew to see what's happening. When Jesus returned to the temple and began teaching, the leading priests and elders came up to him and demanded, "By what authority are you doing all of these things? Who gave you the right?" "I'll tell you by what authority I do these things if you answer one question," Jesus replied. "Did John's authority of baptism come from heaven, or was it merely human?" They talked it over amongst themselves. "If we say it was from heaven, he will ask us, why didn't we believe John? But if we say it was merely human, we'll be mobbed because the people believed John was a prophet." So they finally replied, "We don't know." And Jesus responded, "Then I won't tell you by what authority I do these things." So the interesting thing here is that Jesus tells them, "Hey, I'll answer your question if you answer my question first." He asked the question and they refused to answer it because they knew that if they answered it one way or the other, they would be in trouble. And thus, Jesus says to them, if you're not going to answer my question, then I'm not going to answer your question. Now, Jesus doesn't stop at this mic drop. He continues on to knock some sense into the Pharisees. In that same way, Goku knocks some sense into Frieza in this scene.
I'm gonna slap some sense into you!
At this point in the story, things have gotten out of control. Frieza has killed some of Goku's friends and this planet that they're on is about to explode. Now, Goku had enough of Frieza and he felt that if his punches weren't going to knock some sense into him and neither would the energy blast, well, then he was just going to slap some sense into him. By the way, let me know in the comments if you remember this scene because I had completely forgotten about this gold mine. Jesus does something similar. Don't worry. Jesus uses his words. Children, remember, use your words. Jesus continues on to telling the parable of the two sons. And what this parable says is that there was a father who approached his son, his first son, and asked him to go work in the field. The son refuses to go out and work in the field, but then changes his mind and goes out anyways. Now that same father goes to his second son and asks if he is willing to go out to work in the field. Now the second son says that he will go out and work on the field, but never does. After Jesus tells this story, he asks a question to the Pharisees, and this question is, who did his father's will? Now the Pharisees obviously reply and say that the one that did his father's will was the one that changed his mind and went out anyways. Now check out what Matthew 21:32 says. Then Jesus explained his meaning. "I tell you the truth, corrupt tax collectors and prostitutes will get into the kingdom of God before you do." Now this was a great insult to the Pharisees. Now for you to understand how great of an insult this was, you need to understand the prostitutes and tax collectors were looked at as the lowest of the low in that society, while the Pharisees were held at much higher esteem. So for Jesus to compare the two, to say that the tax collectors and the prostitutes would make it to heaven before they do, was a complete and utter insult. This all boils down to the fact that the prostitutes and the tax collectors ended up changing their minds like the first son did, whereas the Pharisees were stubborn and were not willing to listen to the truth of the kingdom. Now, Jesus actually goes on to tell two other stories showcasing how the Pharisees were failing at being spiritual leaders. Let me know in the comments if you would like me to cover those two stories as well. They're pretty interesting. Now, I share all of this to make one specific point with you today. And that is that Jesus was a fighter. I think that oftentimes we hear of Jesus being a lover, somebody that was compassionate, that took care of people. But it's not often that we hear people talking about how Jesus was a fighter and that he truly fought for the things that he believed in. Alright guys, this is all that I had for you today. I hope that it was a blessing. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to share, like, and subscribe. Again, I do have a t-shirt store. Make sure to check that out. And as always, I just want to remind you that we must persevere.